There is no plan to deliberately crash the US dollar. That's what Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says now in a highly explosive interview. So there is also no deliberate market crash of Bitcoin and stock markets. We need to look at why the US government is vehemently weighing that the markets are deliberately crashing in a whole lot of people. So they're the US government of deliberately crashing the market, the stock markets, Bitcoin, and so on. The highly explosive part here is that this statement comes from Howard Lutnick, who is known to have invested several $100 million in Bitcoin. Additionally, Cathie Wood from ARK Invest says that Bitcoin will surpass gold. And we have Bitwise CIO, who now actually says that the US will buy Bitcoin this year. But first, we need to look at a highly explosive statement from Vivek Ramaswamy, who is also part of the Trump team. And he says here, it is now very, very clear. Bitcoin is the hedge, meaning Bitcoin is the insurance here. Paolo Adrino posted this here. After Bitcoin is behaving relatively well in the current crash phase, as in the current correction phase, clearer than today. The game might have gone down a bit again, but compared to other major indices, Bitcoin is holding up very well. And now we see that even top politicians in the USA recognize this. He was also a presidential candidate in the USA and was part of the Donald Trump team. He says here, hey, it's very clear that Bitcoin is now the hedge, and that's really an incredible thing. And then we had the GameStop CEO here, who actually tweeted, yeah, if all the tariffs and so on come, then eventually the iPhone might cost $10,000 here because it's made in the USA and that's much, much more expensive than being produced in China and so on. And then Michael Saylor says here, you're going to love your $1 million made in the USA Bitcoin. So you're going to love your Bitcoin that end. Created here in the USA would mean, or whatever, or bought in the USA, which would then be worth $1 million. So Michael Saylor is making a very, very bullish statement here. He says here, hey, Bitcoin will definitely go to 1 million. I mean, he also talks about 10 million, 40 million, and so on. In that sense, it's actually more like this here, a bearish statement from Michael Saylor when he says, Bitcoin is going to 1 million. And now we really need to look at this highly explosive statement from Howard Lutnick. And many people really missed this statement. It's not really published anywhere prominently, or something like that. I actually only saw it by chance. And here Howard Lutnick clearly says in the interview, no, the current intention is not to crash the markets, not to crash the dollar, but rather to get America back on track. Because many are currently saying, okay, yes, Donald Trump, the plan is working perfectly. They want to crash the US dollar, crash the stock markets, crash Bitcoin, and so on, so that the Fed is forced to lower interest rates, allowing them to refinance more cheaply. However, Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, says something completely different here. I mean, you have to evaluate it now. I'll show you the clip, then you can evaluate for yourselves whether he's lying or telling the truth. We'll take a look at it shortly, and then we'll also evaluate it, because what is being said here is really very, very explosive.
This is the biggest change you're ever going to see because you have the right guy in the White House doing the right things, protecting American workers.
So it is true. It's a strategy to weaken the dollar.
It is not a strategy to weaken the dollar.
But it's part of the plan. It's part of the plan.
It is not a plan. We don't have a plan about the dollar. We have a plan about American workers. We have a plan about American factories. And these are all outcomes of stop you manipulating our currency. Stop it. Okay. And if that means the dollar goes back to where it should be because you've stopped manipulating it, it makes sense to me.
Also, you can see here, Howard Lutnick is very, very upset because the reporter is insisting and saying, so is it true, hey, that the dollar is supposed to be devalued and that there's a plan to crash the dollar. And then Howard Lutnick says very emphatically, no, 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 there is no plan to crash the US dollar. What are you thinking? And so on. And you can really see the aggressiveness in the tone. And this is often a sign that perhaps a sensitive point has been hit. Because if this, let's say, wasn't a sensitive point, then the reaction probably wouldn't be so aggressive. Maybe there is indeed a secret plan to crash the economy, the stock markets, and so on. So I'm not so sure if Howard Lutnick is actually playing with open cards, let's say. So there no Howard Lutnick has several $100 million in Bitcoin investments. That means he's not doing himself any favors here if he causes a crash, because his own wealth would initially go down. But in the long term, he might hope for an even bigger pump upwards, because then the Fed starts pumping liquidity into the market. I found this to be a very, very interesting reaction from Howard Lutnick. Howard Lutnick has often been in the spotlight. Recently, I saw an interview with him where it was mentioned that the economic figures in the USA are really bad because the Fed of Atlanta has released very, very poor forecasts. He escalated and said, no, those are all lies and so on. The economic figures, it's all fake and so forth. In America, everything is great. It's similar to how Donald Trump says that criticisms are sometimes just brushed aside. I can't say much about it. He's also talking about currency manipulation, saying it needs to stop. So this has to stop now, here with all the manipulation. I'm not quite sure what he means by that, whether he means the Fed or I don't know exactly what he means by that. Unfortunately, I only have the small excerpt. If you know what he means by that, what is supposed to be stopped here? Which manipulation? Whether it's the Fed that is supposed to be stopped, or if he perhaps means that other countries here are using the US border without paying tariffs or something like that. Maybe he means something like that. I can't say for sure. In any case, we now had a very, very interesting statement from ARK CEO Cathie Wood, who is always, I would say, very, Very controversial. She is often discussed. Some say Cathie Wood to the moon. Others say, well, she has ruined her entire portfolio, and so on. In any case, she is a billionaire herself. That means somehow she has already become wealthy. That means she must have some skills. She is ultra bullish. As far as Bitcoin is concerned, she says Bitcoin will rise to 1.5 million US dollars by 2030. Now she makes a new prediction and says here that Bitcoin will surpass gold.
Bitcoin to gold. Gold has had a good run against Bitcoin. Bitcoin did very well relative to gold in 23 and 24, but not so this year. Nonetheless, we do think over time Bitcoin will appreciate relative to gold. And as you can see, it has not broken the uptrend line.
So there, I first said that in the past, Bitcoin has obviously performed much, much better. Like gold, that's very clear. So now, in the last few weeks, we've seen a better performance from gold compared to Bitcoin. But we still have to say that since the Trump election, Bitcoin has still performed better than gold. Many people forget that. Those who now say, okay, gold to the moon and so on. And Bitcoin is doing very, very poorly. But no, if we take a look, since Trump was elected here, Bitcoin has actually performed better than gold. But in the last few weeks, it has reversed. However, Cathie Wood says that in the future, gold will depreciate compared to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin will essentially get closer and closer to gold. And of course, if gold continues to depreciate, there will eventually be the flippening, where Bitcoin's market capitalization surpasses that of gold. I mean, she doesn't give an exact date here, but I think it's very, very obvious that Bitcoin will overtake gold sooner or later. The question is, will it be 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years? Gold will also continue to rise in relation to fiat money, because gold is not a bad investment vehicle or anything. It's just that Bitcoin is on another level. Yesterday, I heard a quote from Max Kaiser who said, gold is the Bitcoin of the poor. So poor people use gold and rich people use Bitcoin. Yes, as I said, I don't really like gold bashing. Gold still has its justification. But Max Kaiser is basically right when he says gold is the Bitcoin for poor people. There was also a very, very exciting piece of news. It says here that Germany wants to withdraw 1,200 tons of gold from the USA. So apparently the CDU wants to withdraw 1,200 tons from New York because they no longer trust Donald Trump and so on. And we also know that there are massive gold transfers from London to New York. And maybe they have already anticipated that people will now withdraw the gold. But I'm curious to see if the USA will even allow this to happen. Germany has already withdrawn large parts of its gold from the USA, as far as I know. I'm not a complete expert here. I don't know if the 1,200 tons are the remainder of what we still have in the USA. I mean, in principle, that would be a good thing. But so that might upset the USA because the gold is kept there to show that we trust you, we are dear allies and so on. The USA has stationed some military operations in Germany again, and maybe that's been the idea behind it so far. But of course, for Germany to be more independent wouldn't be so bad. But I'm really curious to see how the Americans will react to that. I think it won't be so easy to withdraw the gold from here. And secondly, there's the question of whether the gold is even there. I mean, they probably won't hand over the gold if it's not there. That's the next problem. And the same problem exists with Fort Knox. If it's audited, there might not be any gold in Fort Knox. So the whole story is going to be very, very interesting. And now we have a great statement from Bitwise CEO Matt Huggan, who is always very, very bullish. And he clearly states that the US will buy Bitcoin this year. And he explains exactly why this will happen this year.
You made a post on LinkedIn saying that people were generally wrong about their impression of the United States Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. Can you elaborate or embellish a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, what really tweaked me on that, well, I think there are two things. There are two angles that I was pointing that out. One is I think they're wrong that the US won't buy more Bitcoin. Yeah. I think if you look at the wording of the executive order, it said that the Secretary of Commerce and Treasury shall find ways to buy more Bitcoin on a budget. Not that they may or they might or they could. I pointed out that, I used to be a speechwriter for federal government in a past life. Yeah. And they care about word choice. They're not like, whatever. It's like every word is painful and fought over. And certainly words like shall. That's a very specific word. And I think people just read past that because crypto Twitter is so impatient. They're like, why didn't they smash by 1 million Bitcoin today? It's not how governments work. And so I think people are going to be shocked. I bet we'll be buying Bitcoin this year. And I bet the US is going to buy a lot of Bitcoin.
So he clearly says people will be shocked. The USA will buy Bitcoin, and not just Bitcoins. They will buy a lot of Bitcoins. And he simply read through the executive order again carefully. He said most people skimmed it and didn't really notice. He used to be a writer in the US government, writing speeches and so on. And he says they are very, very specific when it comes to words. They don't just throw out random words or anything like I do, but they really go through each word individually. And here, the word should or I believe it's correctly translated as the US shall buy Bitcoin, meaning they should buy Bitcoin here, or they should look for ways to buy Bitcoin here. I believe that's the correct formulation, and that clearly indicates an indication that it doesn't mean they could buy Bitcoin, or they might possibly. It makes sense to buy Bitcoin or something like that, but it clearly states here, you should buy Bitcoin, and you should find ways to make it happen here. Of course, you have a little time for that, but the end result should be that you buy Bitcoin here, and it is very, very certain that many will buy Bitcoin here. And then you can brace yourselves if a lot of Bitcoin is really bought here, because don't assume it's just a few, but rather a lot. Then it would definitely push the price up again, and it would push the sentiment up. It would also be exciting if that then happens simultaneously with the Fed, when the Fed pumps liquidity back into the market. So we still have very, very bullish things ahead of us this year, which we can be very, very excited about. I've told you this from the beginning. When the executive order came out, I immediately told you, hey, they are going to buy Bitcoin. It's quite clear that they will buy Bitcoin. It just needs a little more time and so on. That's something that has leaked out from time to time, where then here, Bohine says, yes, we could theoretically buy unlimited Bitcoin and other people who are just putting massive pressure here. Then we have all the states. We still have the Cynthia Loomis picture and so on. So it really looks like this is no joke, but that it can really happen here. Or rather not just can happen, but that it will happen. And now a very, very big thing. Today is Satoshi Nakamoto's birthday. So happy birthday, bro, wherever you are. And now there's a special promotion from TREZOR. There's a special sale where you can get massive discounts, sometimes up to 30%. There are bundles and so on, where you can get 2 hardware wallets together for cheaper prices. I'll put a link here with the code Bitcoin Hotel. In lowercase, there are also discounts. So if you've always wanted to buy a hardware wallet, now is the time to do it here at TREZOR. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link below too. 21 Bitcoin, where you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply. You can use the code. You can also save up to 20% on fees when buying Bitcoin here. Highly recommend it. Guys, see you. Until then, peace out.